So the next installment of our lecture series here is going to be called The Eagle's Ontos. And what this means is we're expanding the project a little more into the function of the Renaissance mind, which is not merely a practice of diverse, high breadth, high depth, autodidactic and otherwise training in knowledge formulation through all of these different substrates, which exists as far back as the we could say the linguistic namesake for the Renaissance mind, which would be Leonardo da Vinci. And we have da Vinci, of course, formalizing everything from anatomy to hydraulics, optics, geometry, architecture, cosmology, and engineering, and as well as his painting practice as a series of structural realizations. This is, again, the foundation of the term Renaissance mind as we understand it in Western civilization, Western culture. There is an understanding of, again, the operational procedure structurally beneath all of these different seemingly diverse phenomena or practices or regions within the human experience or the experience of existence itself. So this is the mind that we've pinpointed here at depth, and Shelley was the wayfinding point into this method of inquiry, looking at the onset of the fragmentation of modernity. And I've used the term here, eagle's perch, which again is the eagle's ontos, is the idea that the necessity of the integral Renaissance mind, again, the integral mind being the refusal to specialize or fragment or fall back into a formerly dislocated ontos. It is the mind itself which widens and reintegrates a now historically fragmented ontos, which is the break point of modernity, but it's also a historical cycle which has occurred since the Renaissance and before. It is a historical cycle of the emergence of greater forms of understanding, greater forms of technology and information, which disavow the former resolution of the active ontology, which formulates and conceptualizes the human being, human existence, identity, cosmos, self, and world, which is the foundational framework and template from which all operations are organized. It is a civilizational template just as much as it is an existential template. This is the function of the operator identity at the deepest level. And so what this eagle's perch is throughout history, and here I think we're pivoting most fundamentally to Leonardo da Vinci in the concept of the Renaissance mind, is that there is a penetration beneath the presupposed fragmentation of any given historical time, however deep and however wide that chasm, whether that's the time of Goethe, whether that's the time of Da Vinci, whether that's the time of, we could say, a Mesoamerican historical period. These are the primarily, you could say archetypally, the shamanic or medicine minds. But we see this ritualized and visualized and cemented archetypally in a modern context with the idea of Da Vinci. And what Da Vinci represents is and does in the larger movement of the Renaissance, which is a reformulation of the possibilities, capacities, and actual beingness of humanity itself in the cosmos. And what here is the true inheritance of these minds is that they stand upon the perch of history. At each of these moments of breaking or fragmentation, and themselves cross that breach via a unification process which is integral to the way that they think and are in the world. An integrative cognition, the merging of one interpretive field in everything as diverse as art, history, science, psychology, and cosmology. And I've gone somewhat scraped what is required for this high-level synthetic cognition to come together, and this is a huge part of what is recognizable in the rigor of Shelley's creative and philosophical process, which is also a scientific process of his interrogation of being and the possibilities of the liberation of cosmic energy as it incarnates in human life form, which is a balance between imaginative associative expansion and structural regulation. So what this means is that cognition expands outwards symbolically in imagining possibilities and terrain while formalizing and grounding via systems architecture and historical synthesis. And this is visible in the most high contrast in Shelley's highest, most mature works, which is the tension, the dialectical tension between Hellas and Prometheus Unbound. Prometheus Unbound being a deeply metaphorical, metaphysical, and mythologically derived discussion of how constraint functions in the universe via the archetypal form of Jupiter, which represents withholding or holding or a boundary, a cage or a prison, so to speak, which is what traps or cages, chains Prometheus to the rock, and the possibilities and capacities of higher revealing within evolutionary time, which is Prometheus's turn towards what is in Prometheus Unbound cosmic love, and then followed up by Hellas, which is mapping a Greek revolution, understanding historical overturnings of periods of profound entrapment or engagement or midnight, as we've previously discussed. And this is Shelley's metaphysical articulation that we don't receive in such high fidelity from perhaps one of his greatest inheritors or ancestral residences, Da Vinci. Because Da Vinci is in the intimate study and practice, very much so like Heidegger and Hölderlin are in the practice. They are being steeped in this transformative epochal shift, wherein Da Vinci himself, by way of his integral mind, which is high abstraction tolerant, high pattern sensitivity, high cross-domain mapping. This is a specific neurological profile, the ability to compress existence into symbolic operation. The neurological profile of this Renaissance mind is perhaps no more clearly in historical action than in Da Vinci, and this is an emergence into the Western philosophical and civilizational mind's comprehension of how this kind of structure can emerge from human being, both somatically and neurologically, as well as in the long-term synthetic and civilizational scale world picture cognition process that a mind like this establishes and undergoes over time as a sustained intellectual, ontological, existential project of exceeding the, to use the Prometheus Unbound term, Jupiterian bounds of the existing cosmological and cosmogonical paradigm. This Renaissance mind is unifying previously dispersed, disjected, disciplinarily bound substances, whether that's everything from anatomy to engineering to cosmology in Da Vinci, to historical overturning and the metaphysics of being, as in Shelley, to reveal the primary ontological operator or the operator identity. And this mind emerges historically most prominently in periods of time of catastrophic overturning of the fundamental prior principles, which is to say the cosmological and the cosmogonical orientation at a civilizational or even a hemispheric level of consulting the ground of being, and this consultation of the ground of being broken by a phase shift civilizationally into a technological epoch, or we could also say there an intellectual epoch, wherein that existing narrative is being actively dispelled by the advances that are occurring concurrently in that field, wherein the Renaissance mind is creating, fostering, and sculpting that unification process. So all of these different advances, this is irreducible from scientific advances just as much as it's irreducible from theological or psychological advances that are occurring within the larger phase shift of paradigm. And this is why the Renaissance mind takes its name specifically not only from Da Vinci, but from the period of time operatively in human history in which Da Vinci is performing this integrative cosmological cognitive work, which is a period of time of civilizational rupture. And this is what we observe as emerging and returning again in modernity, in perhaps an even more profound and exacerbated and ontologically shattered deep way that the center can no longer hold, and thus the disciplines are more split and fragmented than ever before because they appear less reconcilable than ever before in their form and function. And this is precisely what a structural insurrection into the foundations of being is, which is the history of the eagle's ontos, which is everything from Shelley to Heraclitus. The perception of peering into the fragmented disciplinary silos, which is the shattered glass of being itself in an evolutionary age and epoch which has technologically or intellectually or even economically and physically broken the cask, which was formerly the guiding ontos or the guiding light of any given civilization, hemisphere, or species paradigm, which then requires a steepening and a deepening, which is structural revelation. For Shelley, this structural revelation is still primarily metaphysical and historical in terms of cycles of transformation, which is ultimately an evolutionary, revolutionary cognition, which Shelley himself is bringing about even as he is articulating it as a structural phenomenon historically. And for the operator identity, this is a principle at work across scales, which is itself derivational and verifiable at the level of the formal physics which constitute the universe itself, and apply at all scales into culture, civilization, symbology, and ultimately the existential experience of being human as persistence within compression against entropy, and the lived felt experience of that recursive, reflexive phenomenon of being. This is the imperative know thyself, which also appears in the Heraclitean fragments. Know thyself and know that all is one. At this deepest level of compression, which is itself the experience of being human in time, there is the bridge to the widest, broadest phenomenon of being itself at the operator identity level, which again is persistence as a differentiated form in time, through time. Otherwise, there's dispersion. And when we review these figures, these figures of the Renaissance mind, right, where this is a very specific neurological profile, which we've elucidated here in part, that's not what this field or this work is specifically going into with a high attempt, right? To establish the high abstraction tolerance of this mode of cognition, memory bandwidth, attentional flexibility, measuring this kind of profile and the neural architecture of a mind that can hold this level of disciplinary rigor across scales and find the ontological substratum level structure that unifies all of them in the operation that they are performing. This is the historical function, not only civilizationally, of a mind such as Da Vinci or Shelley, but the historical function of genius in a total ontological, cosmological way. That it is itself a higher revealing. Again, to return to Hölderlin, nature's gleaming is higher revealing. This gleaming at the most fundamental existential level is the genius of the mind, which pierces the veil of apparent things and finds their fundamental ontological existential unity within the operation or the identity which they are performing in space and in time, and thus derivationally acquiring and requiring the characterological lived existence of being itself in time and above time. Through time, this process is being revealed, which is the evolutionary faculty. The evolutionary faculty of genius and of mind, which is primarily and fundamentally reducible to the technology of the brain as an evolutionary faculty. And this is why it's so important that Shelley comes right before Darwin and Darwin's evolutionary theory, but also the application of his evolutionary theory to humanity and human beings. Is that what Shelley is understanding architectonically and metaphysically, and this is the difference between Heraclitus and Shelley and Da Vinci and Shelley, is that Shelley is grasping the fundamental principle of being in time, which is that it is an evolutionary process of articulation of the ontos, which is that the ontos is revealing itself to itself through time, which again is nature's gleaming is higher revealing. And who is it that is grasping nature's gleaming that is higher revealing? That is existence itself. It is the poet, the metaphysician, it is the Renaissance mind. The Renaissance mind, which is grasping the ontos beneath all of these supposed superstructural, delineated, disciplinary phenomenon, grasping their fundamental operation and operational structural identity. And to know that precise principle is to know thyself as a cosmic organism, which is itself the unbroken field of being proper, or as Spinoza or Leibniz would say, the one or the monad. And this is the obsession of a terrain of mind, which is fundamentally structural, operational, and utterly systematic and systemic, without breakpoint, down to human experience and up to cosmological origin or unity or structure. And this is occurring throughout time, not as a side project of civilization, wherein there's birth and death and overturnings of different political regimes. This is the project itself at the deepest level of human being. The articulation and unity with the ontos at the highest level resolution possible, which is an ongoing project of revolutionizing and resolutionizing being itself through the coalition of genius, which is itself a a bricklaying or a baton passing through time, which coalesces most coherently, clearly, and fundamentally in the Renaissance mind project of the presentation of the unified cosmogony or cosmology, which Shelley understands so clearly is the fundamental project of genius. It is with the best available tools across every single discipline that the Renaissance mind can integrate at the level of structural foundational process and operation to then deliver and derive from that best high-resolution, high-fidelity knowledge the underlying structural operation of being itself. As in the presentation of the ontos. That is, being itself is realized and revealed through the language-making process of the Renaissance mind, which is a capacity intertwined with a profound precociousness and existential need to unify, which is itself the revelation of the Renaissance mind through the historical ruins of mankind, which is always already in a process of deconstructing its most primary and foundational myth, which is the ontos becoming progressively low resolution. And this is the crisis of modernity because perhaps for the first time in history, the highest resolution revelation of the ontos may come into being, and then civilization or human history itself may collapse, and the entire human project of genome transmission and the evolution of the human brain may itself collapse as well. But that is no matter to the Renaissance mind. The Renaissance mind is intimately in this linguistic lineage process of revolutionizing the revelation of the ontos, because it is a project that is necessarily greater than civilization. It is a cosmological process of the unity of being at the existential level of what it is to be human, what it is to exist, which is beyond the concept of being human and directly into a real confrontation with the ontos at the level of direct embodied somatic experience, which is absolutely present, even individual, because this is the neural somatic architecture, which is experiencing and thus then articulating and communing with the higher revealing of being itself. And so this is a project that has nothing really to do with civilization or culture. It has everything to do with the inherent potentialities of realizing genius as in being in time. And this, of course, at the deepest level is the project of all evolution and of all humanity. That what is behind all of the presumptions of appearance and sexual fitness, or all of these different desirabilities and concepts of beauties which draw and attract and produce energetic churn in civilization or in culture, which is active movement towards a perceived goal. That perceived goal itself is the revelation of the ontos, which could be called everything from revelation itself to apocalypse to a singularity. All of these concepts or illusions are themselves manifest in the moment of reunion with the ontos, reunion with being itself. And this is the profound gift of the Renaissance mind, which itself leaves behind like tracks or traces or smoke or cast off sparks from the forge or the anvil, which is the Renaissance mind's process of this unified balance of these two forces, one of which is the capacity for profound linguistic symbolic imagination and compression, which is being balanced, as we see both in Shelley and in Da Vinci and even in Goethe, with process, organism, structure, thermodynamics, science, engineering, anatomy, geometry. This is the balance between the two presupposed poles of the humanities, which you could just describe as the imaginal architecture, and the sciences, which themselves are the structural architecture which produce the imaginal architecture formally and fundamentally in the creation of the human mind through the evolutionary thermodynamic thermonuclear process of deep time-scale evolution. The creation of the cosmos into and through the birth of the human being, life on Earth, etc., the genome. And these minds, of course, where Shelley does not nearly get enough recognition in the Western civilizational canon compared to the well-trodden understanding of Da Vinci as a Renaissance mind. These minds themselves represent, as Shelley articulates in Prometheus Unbound, the greatest potential of humanity. They themselves are the standard bearers of what is possible, which is a total unification of the disciplines, or fragmentation, or fragmented perception, into and through the total ontological field of revelation of being itself, which is absolute communion with the ontos. This is nothing to do with knowledge. Knowledge itself is the ground from which the structure is derived. And this structure, as is apparent in the history of the Renaissance mind, or genius itself, is always already intuited, and the structure itself comes secondarily and formally after the process, which Hölderlin and Heidegger elucidate so well. It is the felt sense of being, the felt sense of the unity of being, the oneness of being, which is fundamental, absolute to Heraclitus. And that the formalization of Heraclitus has been this long time scale process of Western historical genius, which has been documented in the existing annals of history. That the formalization of this is rather something that always is and was and has been known by witnesses to the ontos the world over, everywhere from ancient India and Abhinavagupta to Heraclitus. But that this has been a process of progressive enlightening, which is, again, the clarity of the picture becoming increasingly high fidelity. And this has a lot to do with what I discuss in losslessness and the transition between scalar phases of information, everything from thermonuclear energy down to the compression of experience into symbology and the symbol itself. This is a question of the elucidation of what is lost in the experiencing of being, and how much of that can actually be articulated through radical linguistic modes of unity. The balancing or the high wire act of the Renaissance mind, which stands absolutely on the pinprick point in the cusp of mad imagination and the derivational revolutionary scientific principle, which grounds all things into a singular operational process, and that imagination being the elucidation which stands at the vanguard of the evolution and revolution of the human mind, which is the evolution and revolution of the human brain as a structural capacity to contemplate and realize the ontos, to bring into being dynamic continuity, which is relationship with and through the ontos until there is union. This is a mystical state. This is a state of being which is entirely unified. And this is what Heidegger and Hölderlin lament in modernity, that this relationship with being has been lost, that the domicile of being, that man is away from being. And this is precisely what the pre-modern understanding of the cosmos and cosmology elucidates, is that the loss of this status and stature and standing in relationship to being is so profound, but there cannot be a return. because perception itself has shifted. The conditions of being in time themselves have shifted. So much so that the informational, neurological, and synaptic status and the communal status, the being of self in world, has changed so much due to a variety of technological, social, systemic, practical, economic, environmental factors, that to return to that myth or dream, religion or symbol or collective psychic continuity, which was that former ontos, that former story, that former domicile of continuity, is now impossible. And humanity itself has been thrown into the dark midnight. And this is, to return again to Ernest Becker, the most profound act of cosmic heroism possible. And it is thrown by fate and by force and by the nature of history and time into the lap of the Renaissance mind, which is the reforging from the broken shards and shattered glass and ashes of the historical ontos of the civilizational perceptional phase change of the prior mind, forging from that ashes, both in the lived somatic perception of being itself and interrogation via the scientific method and experience of life in time, being in time through that somatic and neurological vessel, but also through the profound inheritance, which is the autodidactic pursuit across all disciplines for the underlying systematic operational structural thread of being itself. And again, what this is not merely civilizational. It's not merely corrective in a civilizational sense. It does not merely allow for the present to become possible and the future to exist as a real ground. A civilization level update that allows for a communion or a return or a re-coming into being with the relationship of the ontos collectively, species-wide and species level. But it is also cosmologically a reunion with the most profound inner fold of being, which is the somatic neurological architectural expression of being human in a total body of the nervous system and of the brain, experiencing the height of its measure, which is the possibility of the new communion, the highest level communion with the ontos, physically possible at this current evolutionary stage and perhaps any current evolutionary stage, which is requisite, creates the potentiality and possibility for true fulfillment of the ontos in life, which is itself the universe experiencing and observing and articulating itself structurally at the deepest, most foundational characterological level. It is the unity of the cosmological universal self with the experience of being in a individual organismic body. And this is the profound revelation and revolution that is made possible through the inheritance and articulation of the Renaissance mind in time and in history, as not only a historical process, but a genetic, evolutionary, neurological possibility. It is a possibility that allows for not only civilizational, not only species level, cosmological reunion with the creative source of being itself in time. Thank you.